Well done, Disney. You've done it again. You've ruined another original classic. Yeah, I'm gonna go out and say it. I've been developing the same old opinion over the years, watching more and more Disney live-action remakes, and that is that they are all fine, but bad. Great in a bubble if you haven't seen the story before, in a inferior medium compared to the creativity of animation, and when you actually know the source material, it is even far inferior than that. And Disney's Lilo and Stitch remake is no different at all. It is, I would say, up front and center, a 6 out of 10 at most. Now, since I'm in the UK, I actually got to see this movie a whole 2 days earlier than those of you in the US, as it came out on the 21st, not the 23rd. So I'm not going to go into full spoiler territory just yet. I mean, I assume you know the plot, but at the very least, we'll keep to what is original and samey from the source material, because they did decide to make some choices, and we'll get to them. So, where do we even begin? Well, I think the original Lilo and Stitch movie is one of the very best that Disney ever made, in my opinion, in animation or any form. Now, maybe this comes from a childhood nostalgia for early 2000s movies, but I feel like there is so much nuance and depth that you can enjoy as both a child and an adult when you re-watch movies of that era. I would go on to say that it has a similar level of intelligence to it to the likes of early Pixar writing, because the movie's not just about an alien thing and a broken family. There are interesting layers you can depict out of multiple themes of what the story is trying to tell. Whether it's the theme of sisterhood and stepping up when tragedy falls on parents, talking about the child's book of the ugly duckling, and finding a found family as opposed to your biological one. There's an interesting layer you can read in about Hawaii itself and the over-tourism that affects the locals in the area that creates an interesting divide politically on what is successful for the economy and what is damaging to the environment. There's a thing about identity with some of the alien characters and the disguises they choose to wear, and existentialism in the form of what is your purpose in life. What do you do when you have no purpose? What is there to desire and reach when you're built for one thing and you cannot achieve it, or you just don't have anything at all? When going back to the original movie as an adult, there are so many interesting layers and depth that you can read that you would have easily had go over your head as a child, and in this remake, you're not gonna find that. And it's interesting because this movie is like 50-60% actually the original source material, and then they go off on one and make all sorts of changes that kind of butterfly effect through the whole plot and presentation. But even just talking about the remake part of the Lilo and Stitch remake, it just seems so clear that the tone of the early 2000s era is lost on modern day Disney. And of course it is. It's going to be different 20 years later, and it's interesting to see how they adapt the same ideas going forwards. But I can't help but just feel that not only because it's in an inferior medium compared to animation, so you can do less visual things, but I just can't help but sense that the director of this movie simply couldn't keep up with the director of the original movie. Ironic, because the original director is in this movie. He's Stitch. Though he did assist, but doesn't make this the greatest work. Now don't get me wrong, I think this is a passable movie. It falls into that irritating area of, yeah, it's a fine, functional movie. It is definitively family entertainment. But there's none of that depth and nuance that enriched my childhood compared to the children of today. Now, there are some things that do need to be updated, and that's interesting to see how it works. This isn't set in 2002 or anything, so there is modern technology, and thankfully, it takes quite a backseat for the most part. Only really at the end do you even properly notice some high-tech stuff, other than alien gear. But when it comes to the things they actually kept, I'm trying my best to keep on topic before I go off on one. I really want to go off on one with this movie. We'll get there. It really does feel like this movie is doing some of the source material because it has to, and it does it in a way that doesn't enrich or really respect the original source material enough to my taste. What it really wants to do is explore in the new creative direction from the butterfly effect it's caused, and so because of that, the actual main lines that you're meant to know, the scenes you're meant to see, are either omitted, or if they are there, they're rushed. The direction, or specifically the delivery, is really strange in this movie. Now, maybe it's emblematic of just the general tone of movies these days. They're getting faster and faster, and it sounds like enunciation is an afterthought these days. And I won't lean this entirely on just the Lilo actress herself, although a lot of her lines do get kind of lost. But also the fact that, like, the audio mixing has Stitch so loud compared to everybody else, and everyone's saying lines as fast as possible that it doesn't feel like big moments when you have the arguments, for example, between sisters. Instead of ending an argument on something like, and so am I, and that leading to a silence, it's like, no, and so am I, move on, and then we're on the next story beat. There's terrible examples. I don't have the clips for you yet. I think I have enough thoughts already. I'm going to make a Disney's terrible Lilo and Stitch live-action remake. I'll work out a shorter title, hopefully. Because I really want to dig into this movie, in especially the delivery between the original source material and this, because the magic is just not there this time, in some way. I can't tell if it's the performance, the direction, or executive toning. I don't know. But there are so many beats that you would come to expect to see, and so often those beats just don't hit as well as they used to. And what could probably be assumed here, every time I'm looking at my notes, it's looking at the things that have changed or not done so well. But yeah, so often, more than not, you'll see the lines that you recognize, and you'll see it happen, and you'll be like, something's missing. More often than not for me, it was that so many lines were crunched together in and so quickly paced, far quicker than the original's delivery, that it just felt like they were touching the beats to say we've done it before they can run off and do the movie they really wanted to do. And it's especially noticeable when it's clearly choreography that they're trying to lean into. There's a simple little moment where Lilo is kicking Nani out of her bedroom in order to see the shooting star. And in animated form, you can see it's a whole thing of her, like, rolling up, kicking her out. Nani's draped over Lilo, being like, oh, I can't go. This is so, you know. Genuinely great chemistry. It feels natural, even in animated form. Magic. The animators are the real magic. When it's done here, they do all those beats, but it just doesn't feel the same. Maybe it's because actually having a full adult woman leaning on a child doesn't quite work in live action compared to animation. It just doesn't feel anything less than forced, but I think it's really emblematic of just them doing the beats and just missing something. But then, as we move slightly closer towards spoiler territory, there's the things that they kept, but they've tweaked a little bit, you know? A little bit of tweakly rather than peakly, if you know what I'm saying. And there is loads of this. We're not fully talking about the omitted stuff yet, or the giant new creative choices they've inserted, but there are other things that they tried to do in either adapting or just doing differently that, again, sometimes work, more often than not don't. Take, for example, we'll start with an easy one, Pleakley and their clothing. Now, I know I was at least a little bit hesitant that they didn't do a cross-dressing hint in the very first shot we saw of them in the movie, and it's still the same now. It's not as bad. It's interesting. I think this is so emblematic of what Disney wants to present and how they try to sanitize and hide everything. Now that there is a canonical cross-dressing character that they can insert into a movie without it being, you know, an insertion, it's the fourth element that a lot of audiences grind with. Now they have that available, they choose to pull it back instead and shave down the edges. Instead, what we get is a clearly flamboyant male character making more extravagant clothing choices, but not overtly wigs and dresses. It is a compromise halfway through from a company that's scared of its own source material compared to 20 years ago. It's disappointing, but it works. It's fine enough. I found them funny enough as far as they went, and the character still keeps the same feminine traits as the Pleakley performance, even if the majority of the movie they spend in human form, so they've removed, you know, one of the most visually interesting elements of the movie. In fact, it's very clear that the section with the two boys doing kooky antics is kind of what the movie wants to do. There are loads of original scenes. I'm meant to be covering the adaptions, but we'll get there, it's fine. There's loads of additions like that they really lean into, and it's a real shame because when you see the actual cartoony CGI designs of the characters, they look bloody great. Jumba looks fantastic in this movie. When he's not a human. When he is a human, he just looks like a guy. And it doesn't help that he just sounds like a guy. Yeah, probably that's one of the biggest red marks on something they've changed and tweaked. Jumba's voice he's not Jumba anymore. He doesn't have an accent, and maybe that's the main reason. Disney is too afraid to really do an accented character, and hey, maybe there's an argument that there's an element of problematicness to that, sure. But also, he's not even gruff. He just sounds like a high-pitched fellow that's around. He's just a normal it really doesn't fit the CGI design. It only fits when he's a human, because I assume it's the human speaking. But then there's all sorts more that they've changed. Moving away from the alien boys and to the other alien-ish boy, we have Agent Bubbles. So, he has a whole thing going on. Something that was so nice about early 2000s movies is they have a level of respect for their audiences. They feel open in showcasing nuance and subtlety. Part of the charm of the original Agent Bubbles is this giant mystery around him. He's clearly not a social worker and he's got some strange backstory. You find it out only at the end, and that's satisfying. In this, all that mystery is eviscerated, and any hint of who he was before in like you don't really know his original backstory is all on show here. Because it is in fact the case that in this movie, he is not a social worker at all. He shows up halfway through the movie as a CIA agent, handling a bunch of alien things. Add on to the fact that he's not brooding and quiet and intimidating. He's just an old man. And it's just a shell of what the Agent Bubbles was before. And it's interesting, I still liked him as a character in this movie, but he is worse than the version that we've had, and he's not reached the potential of what he could have been. A recurring theme for basically every element of this movie, in my opinion. But we'll talk more about him when we go into the new creative inserts that they've added around this movie. Oh my god, there's so much stuff. Alright, we're moving up a level. I'm now going to spoil the original plotline, so brace yourselves, I assume you know this. Around those notable adaptations with the characters and the story, everything else mostly plays out the same. You know how it is. Stitch will escape, ends up on Hawaii, loses their purpose, discovers somewhat that they have an investment in family, they'll be kidnapped near the end, and then they get to stay on the island. That is the entire premise of the Lilo and Stitch story, but the thing is, there's a whole bunch in this new remake movie that is completely omitted. And so many of these are gigantic scenes. Let me give you a list of them all. We'll start with the biggest, most notable one. No Gantu in this movie. I know Lilo and Stitch already has a little bit of an ensemble cast going on, but one of the main antagonist alien characters who comes down, intrudes, steals Stitch, and then leaves again, missing. Entirely. None of that. Might make you wonder how on earth they're going to do the plane chase at the end. We'll get there. First, other things that get removed include the adoption certificate that Lilo gets. You know, the very MacGuffin that allows Stitch in some form to stay on the state of Hawaii. That very simple piece of paper is missing. The fire truck scene of firefighters going towards the house on fire right near the end of the movie. There is none of that. That is, to me, the most iconic scene of Lilo and Stitch. I remember don't turn left, like in my brain. Missing. There's no Elvis impression. Stitch does not wear an Elvis Presley outfit. Nor is there really a sequence learning about Elvis songs. They keep the vinyl sequence and change it up a bit, but none of the elements of Lilo leaning on Elvis as like the greatest performer as the way that she expresses herself. There is no Ugly Duckling book, you know, the very emotional core moment that links to how Stitch feels as a character and bringing them down to earth away from their destructive tendencies. There are no camping scenes between Pleakley and Jumba. Jumba themselves never mentions that Stitch doesn't have a purpose, nor do they really have the element of him discovering himself not really having a purpose in this whole thing and having the existential element. Jumba in general has none of the jovial, big laughs side of his character. As you can imagine, there is far less destruction because this isn't animated anymore, so every explosion is much tinier. There aren't giant hole guns, there's only tiny hole guns. There isn't the scene where Pleakley is covered in mosquitoes. They barely really talk about the mosquitoes endangered line. I think that's basically been omitted. There's no volcano in the final plane chase. Lilo never banishes Stitch away, saying, "You are the problem, get away from me, you're not my family," or something to that extent. And then, as you can probably guess, with Gantu not around, there is no spaceship chase scene. There aren't two planes. Stitch does not say to Nani, Ohana means family, because she does not confront him at the end when Lilo's been kidnapped, because she hasn't first. And I think the biggest, most emblematic change of all is one that really, really wraps together the difference in the tone that Disney wants to present in sanding down anything chaotic and parodious of the Renaissance era of Disney princesses that Stitch kind of was the first time round. You know, he was meant to be the anti-hero alternative for Disney's iconography. Here's the real big kicker to me, and once you notice it, I feel like you can't unnotice it. They keep the scene, of course, where Stitch is all out at the beginning of the movie, antennae, multiple limbs, spikes on the back, and everything. He goes and hides all of those limbs and body parts before meeting Lilo, and he never brings them out again. Because there is no longer that scene of Lilo banishing Stitch and lashing out at him for all of their problems, Stitch never reveals to Lilo all these extra limbs he has, and at the very end of the movie, when they're saying goodbye, we're a family, Stitch will remain in his cutesy, profitable, palatable plushie form for the consumers to consume, and for Stitch to never show his true, chaotic identity. This was the worry at the start, that they made Stitch too cute and not enough chaotic, whilst Lilo as well is too cute and not enough emotional. I think that on a scale of things, they lean better towards good territory in that. Stitch is plenty chaotic, it's the same voice actor so they know what they're doing, and Lilo does manage to be emotional, even if it's mostly screeching. But I think that point there, amongst all of these massive misses in iconic scenes, the hammock scene is cut in half in order to put it only in the second half of the scene, and most of the big iconic scenes are made to be sped run through. But I think that one there, keeping Stitch cute even at the end, is so emblematic of the Disney that's afraid to touch territory when they have a character built in a certain way and has to shave down even the more unmarketable elements of their characters. It's not even unmarketable, it's just slightly harder for the distributors to make more limbs on it, I guess. Now, I think to me, that is the biggest red flag of this movie, and showcases how the original always will have that extra layer of depth and emotional weight, but there's all sorts of other changes in there that make me roll my eyes. In place of so many scenes and jokes and quips, we have all the more fart jokes, several fat jokes on Jumba because he is a big alien, and also, double-edged sword here, they shove in a random Bruno Mars song into this movie. Uptown Funk. What year was that? That was a song from 2014. Oh, this is interesting. 2014 Bruno Mars song. Hey, maybe they're eternal. Sure, whatever. That plays, do you know when? It plays when Stitch gets run over by the truck. If you haven't seen this movie yet, compare in your mind the Stitch truck scene from the original and combine it with Uptown Funk You Up. What? It's also a slow motion, ha 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 kind of scene, as opposed to the surprisingly brutal and silent soundscape of the original. It's clear that this format of Disney has to play to a really general audience rather than, I don't know, grit, I guess. It's different. Hey there, you've made it to the halfway mark of this video. You know what to do, come subscribe. We'll do more movie reviews as they come out, and the How to Train Your Dragon live action as well, why not? Also in its place, though, is Stitch intruding a wedding scene when they first land on Earth and having a nice old spray in there, and that's genuinely some nice original Stitch content from what I remember, and it's interesting. We've now reached the point where we're going into the original inserts of this movie, okay? And with that, it's 50-50 here on whether it's a good improvement or a bad. So you know how I mentioned that Agent Bubbles is only a CIA agent? Well, that's because they've introduced 2 new human characters to add to this already, you know, unmanageable ensemble if they had to remove an alien to fit in 2 humans. Oh, that's so fun. I love that. What a great ratio. Because now there is a separate social worker, and then Agent Bubbles comes in as like the director. And then there's also a grandma neighbor who is attached to David around. These characters, they're fine. I think they kind of work out. It now basically is a way of filling in the gaps where they've already changed the characters. The social worker is now a split off from the original Agent Bubbles, so that Agent Bubbles can do a little bit more of the CIA stuff. And the grandma's there to do more elements of Nani's character. It's her that takes Lilo into the dog pound for some reason without Nani's consent, and then they get a pet there and then without her. No, it's weird. Very weird directions they take everywhere. But then on the other side of things, when they're trying to do the more emotional, weighted elements of the movie, they take it in some new directions, and sometimes that's pretty good. With the main line of Ohana means family, and family means no one gets left behind, I'll be honest, I half missed it in this movie. I think it is in there, but again, the diction's not there, and the speed and real enriching in the delivery is missing. It's fastly done and repeated quickly in the background as Stitch is going crazy in the foreground or something. But there is a new one that they chuck in there that I think could have worked really well, and then they flub their own original content. There's a part where they're in the hospital from Lilo almost drowning in the surfing scene, whereby the social worker turns to Nani and says, you gotta give up Lilo, essentially, or you can, and then gives them a new term like Ohana and says, essentially, it doesn't mean goodbye, it just means until next time, or something to that extent. I wasn't making notes within the movie. Either way, I really liked that. Having a new Ohana in the modern day to present something is a really nice way to extend. I guess you'd meant to do it in the sequel, but sure, do it in the remake, why not? This line doesn't come back, which is especially ironic because there is all sorts of other rooms to say goodbye, but we'll see you again. In several of the ending parts of the movie, that could fit in as a nice callback to it, and they just don't. Meanwhile, other elements of the emotional beats, such as the Ugly Duckling book, are clearly gone, as Stitch just kind of learns that they're the problem in the background of other scenes that aren't done as well. The hammock scene happens awfully quickly, because it's practically cut in half, and ends with the two sisters on the hammock, playing the ukulele, singing their Hawaiian song and dancing, and Stitch just waddles off at the end without being any more than that. By the way, as we're now going into the fully original new stuff, this is spoilers for the actual remake. Brace yourselves if you haven't seen it. It goes weird. Meanwhile, they add another element of Nani actually being really intelligent and able to go to a good college if it wasn't for the tragedy that befell her family, making her stay back here and look after Lilo. And that's really interesting. But they also, again, don't explore it. There's none of that anguish because she's so set on it anyway, and I guess that's valid. There's none of that real conflict that showcases itself in the movie until it pops up again at the very end. We hear about it at the start, we hear about it at the end, and like, it ties it together, I guess. Another notable change throughout the course of this movie, you know how Jumba usually has a big ray gun that shoots massive holes? They've outright just replaced the gun for 90% of this movie. Instead, this keeps popping up in other movies now. It's in the D&D movie as well. A portal gun is now the thing in this movie. As a way to just teleport around, I guess that's nice. Surely at any point they could shoot under Stitch and they've got him, but who cares? They get to do classic bits of trapping Jumba in an endless fool. Wowee. It's an interesting choice, clearly made so they didn't have to do live action destruction that much, but again is just emblematic of the inferior format that is not animation, because in animation, you can actually blow everything up. There's an aspect of pepper spray for some reason that the grandma gives to Lilo on a whim, and then I don't think that comes back until she, or maybe Nani, sprays Pleakley at the very end for some reason. Like, Hawaiian guy is sometimes there, and again, that's kind of its own thing. He's not a tourist this time, emblematic of the tourist commentary that I mentioned earlier about that sort of anguish between locals and tourism. That's completely omitted as well. So now it's just this guy, who again as well is meant to be going further and further away from the center to drop his ice cream. He's not. He's just there-ish. And also, he very clearly just goes to drop the ice cream. Like, it's not done believably. With no plane chase scene, the plane doesn't scoop down and make him drop his ice cream when he goes out to the middle of nowhere. So what, like, where's the hit, man? There's no dopamine in any of this. Also, in trying to keep things relatively simple and sanitized, when Lilo attacks the other girl at the dance recital, she doesn't jump on top and whack her in the face a few times. She just pushes her once in slow motion in the most classic Marvel kind of way that's not very impactful. The vinyl scene with Stitch playing the Elvis song does appear in this movie, but it's more about how Nani doesn't look at it entirely. It's not a gag, it's just she's too busy to pay attention, which I guess, in that case, is a nice character development. Nice to see, but it's a change. Maybe the least red flag one out of the bunch. But then, yes, there are two final ones, really big ones they do that change a few things. One is they introduce another Ohana line, and this one they do actually follow through on. It's a line that essentially says, "You're not bad, you just do bad things sometimes." Emblematic of both Lilo as a broken child and Stitch as a chaotic alien thing. Nice, likable. Nani says it to Lilo at the beginning, Lilo says it to Stitch near the end. That's nice, that's fine. That's how you do a correct original adaptation that keeps the essence of your source material and words it in a new way for the remake. The other thing they do is the elephant in the room. There's no Gantu. So who's Gantu this time? The answer is Jumba. Jumba is the big bad in this movie. Forget the happy-go-lucky, loud, brash, evil scientist uncle vibes. With no camping scenes, Pleakley and Jumba never bond. With no existential thoughts about purpose in life and what 626 is going to be, there's no introspection on Jumba's part. And instead, the character is played awfully straight. Pleakley is so doofy flaying around over here that Jumba's only annoyed and irritated, and he's the one that kidnaps Stitch and also Lilo on the side, betraying Pleakley and going off on his own thing. It is a massive change that ruins the character. I mean, from the sounds of things, they don't want to bring him back anyway. There's no sequel with him. But it's not a plane chase with two spaceships going along. It's just one leaving. And it moves all sorts of things around. Also, because of the nature of the kidnapping, Jumba fights Lilo and Stitch in their house, destroying it in that final moment, and then portaling to his ship to take Stitch, and Lilo follows. And in doing that, there's none of that argument confrontation between Lilo and Stitch beforehand properly. You don't get that banishment that goes anywhere. And you don't have Stitch left over talking to Nani saying Ohana means family, all the rest of it. All those deep emotional beats are lost immediately as they're portaled into the ship instead. They also do some very terrible sort of logic things, like Jumba is sucked through the back of the plane, he gets stuck in the hole, and then later on, Lilo and Stitch are debating jumping out the hole, so they just stand at it, and the wind's blowing into the spaceship, not out like it was just doing to Jumba. Classic terrible movie stuff. But then also, because Jumba has spent this whole time as a human, it's only now when he turns evil that we see him in his CGI form, and he visually looks great. And it's right at the very end, and we won't see any more of him, as at the ending, Jumba doesn't even stay on the island. He gets imprisoned again like the criminal that he really is. And I guess, character-wise, that does make sense. He is this big evil villain that's made 600 tyrants, but I don't know, well, one of them just makes sandwiches, but still, big change, a way of condensing characters, but weirdly, this is not a condensed movie. You would think this would be faster as a movie because it's condensed all the story beats we know and just added a few inserts on the side. Somehow, this movie is 23 minutes longer with all of those scenes deleted that I mentioned, some of the most iconic, enjoyable stuff. So needless to say, there's been all sorts of changes they've made along the way to tell the story they really wanted to tell that changed for some reason. It's interesting. I feel like after watching this movie, I feel all the more conflicted and curious on the case of the upcoming DreamWorks live-action movie. From the looks of that seems far more close to the source material, as much as I hear it does go in an original spin near the end. It's interesting, because it's like, do I want a fully remake that just touches on the source material and doesn't fix what's not already broken, or do I want it to be adapted and original as well? I guess the result comes down to how well do you do it? And in this case, half of it's good. I like some of the stuff. They clearly do adapt new directions, but a lot of it is also just lesser from its source. The delivery in this movie is fast and chaotic and not enunciated enough, where the emotional beats are left in order to speed through more content in more time. Somehow, the delivery just isn't there compared to perfected voice acting performance. And though the house does get destroyed by the end, it's a bunch of small holes by the real ray gun that's used by Jumba at the end, and then it collapses a chunk of its roof into the rest of the roof. You know, it's not the full flatline at the end of the animation. The kidnapping scene during the surfing moment where Jumba jumps out of the waves and takes Stitch doesn't happen this time. Instead, they're chased on jet skis by both of the boys in human form, all the while CIA agent Bubbles is watching in binoculars and sees the whole thing. And it's just lower, less impactful, and off. That surfing scene as well, by anything, is started for a whole different reason. It's not because Stitch ruins the whole thing and scaring everyone away at the beach or anything. It's just to make them feel better because they've timed like this montage of dealing with Stitch away and done it more like the events are different and it just doesn't work out. So technically, I don't even think Nani got fired from the surfing job. So I guess you can follow up on that technically in theory. And when it's not inferior versions of scenes you've already seen before, it's jokes crammed in there that just don't feel like they fit. They cater to the likes of 2014 Bruno Mars fans. And also, the jokes that they do chuck in are easily so outdated. 2014 is fitting because near the end of this damn movie, there's a point where Agent Bubbles says, you know, I hope you're in bed, Lilo. You better not be doing one of those damn TicTac dances. That is a legitimate line at the end of a 2025 Disney movie. TicTac dances. That is the first joke you can make about TikTok. That's what everybody who's only ever just heard of TikTok says. TicTac is the easiest, lowest common denominator gag pun joke you can make. TikTok's been around since 2016. Okay, sure, maybe that's musically. Okay, then you've got 2017 instead where it was renamed, and 2018 when it was merged on the bigger scale. Even at the latest end of that, if we say TikTok was invented in 2018, that means Disney is making the easiest, flattest, most obvious, easy, low-hanging fruit bait joke 7 years later! This is essentially, to me, the new floss dance. That was milked to hell since 2016, and it never ended. There's also a screaming goat in this movie, but at least it's not the same damn stock sound effect, so that's nice. But just make it, this practically offends me on a comedy sense, because it is such low-hanging fruit. Especially by the Disney in the year of 2025. That's the hill I'm gonna die on. There's a lot of weird creative choices they've made. It is a lesser movie than the original, but TicTac dances, oh, that gets under my skin because it's so not funny. It's so old. Anyway, the only other significant change to really mention, beyond, I think I did mention that the hula dance basically replaces the ugly duckling book sequence. Also, there was a missed opportunity there. It ends with the dance doing like a handshake to yourself, which Lilo teaches to Stitch. Lilo has 4 arms. He could have done a moment of double handshaking to expand the dance and adapt it to him as his own way of doing things. No, that's missing. But no, the one other significant change they make is actually the one big adaptation I quite enjoy. And that is they change the ending of this movie because they've inserted the seeds that Nani is smart and was able to go to college. So in the end of this movie, they decide to let her go. These new neighbor characters, David is there as well, acting as neighbors allows for them to move into the newly rebuilt house so that Nani can leave in order to chase her dreams and be intellectually a marine biologist and I assume come back to the island. But still, it's an interesting nuance of not just sacrificing everything for family and losing your way and adapting instead, finding a way to make it work. Also, she has a portal gun, so she can just come home all the time, so that's nice. I really like that kind of original adaptation that they bring along the way. Even ending off on this one hint they make about they made 3 sisters as like a constellation, but obviously there's only 2 sisters. Stitch ending up being the 3rd sister at the end, all cuddling up to them in the bed. That's nice. But for that one good ending, which is like a half post-credit scene, there's no other post-credit scene. Don't expect any more depth than that. What we have for everything else is the story beats we know, sped run through with little diction and little delivery in the emotional heights. Even the original Ohana Means Family scene is sort of screeched while attacking a fridge, and you know how the fridge scene ends, with it in Nani's face, and they don't express it any more than that. They don't reinterpret. You don't get to really hear those lines. I know those lines already, and I barely heard it in this movie. And then with these changes in characters, like Bubbles being just full-on CIA agent who comes in to intrude the social working, and even some elements of that are not entirely clear. Like, you know how in the original, he is a social worker, but he's a retired CIA agent, so his history allows him to be interconnected. This time, there is a social worker, she says there's a director coming in next week, and then Bubbles comes in earlier than that slot. So did he replace the actual director coming in, and he's actually intruding as an undercover agent now? Or is he legitimately also the director social worker? I don't know. They didn't explore this new territory that they've ham-fisted in here. And it's a shame as well, because the Bubbles character is still a lot of fun, and there are clearly other elements of potential they could have gone with. There's another scene of the social worker, Bubbles, and Nani going up to Lilo's door about to say, hey, we're gonna go say goodbye for a bit. And there's a moment where it's clearly an emotionally slow scene, and Bubbles does look like he's about to cry while waiting for Nani to do the conversation in the bedroom, and they don't milk it any more than that. He just looks sad for the 5-second pause. Even something as simple as a line saying, you know, oh, it never gets easier, you know, as if to insinuate he is a senior officer in this field, could have really explored some element of Bubbles' character, but it's not there. Some of the very best movies are the ones that really emphasize the emotional beats, and it does some of these beats somewhat okay, but there's room for more, and because of that, it flubs when it doesn't hit those marks. Because when it successfully does insert a new emotional hype bit, it can be so satisfying. Such as one other scene. There are so many scenes they've omitted and so many scenes they've inserted. There's so much to talk about in this movie. It's a really interesting case of highs and lows. It's why it's a 6 out of 10, 5 out of 10 at most from me. Because there's a moment when Nani saves Stitch in the water, and she doesn't do so by just lifting him up. They do a really nice way of demonstrating that Stitch is really dense and heavy somehow. And so what she does is she holds him at the bottom of the ocean and runs back to the coast in order to get out of the water. That's a really nice new take on saving Stitch. And also it's embellished with the idea that it's reflecting the photos that Lilo owns of... I don't know. I didn't pick up. I think it's the mother. Like, it's literally their mother used to train underwater by doing the same thing. It's a picture of them with a weighted bull running on the coast. It's like, wow, they're reflecting the person in the photo. I thought it was the mother. Apparently, it might be Nani. Like, it's actually her training, so it lines up that way. It really says something when I couldn't even tell exactly who was in the photo because I might have missed it in that moment. But assuming it's the mother, because that's the more satisfying narrative to me, to have Nani reflecting her mother in that moment, doing the exact same training sequence to actually save somebody's life through all of that is so satisfying. And if there's any original adaptations you want to see in a remake, if they have to be in there, that's how you do it great. This movie is 50% source material, 50% original, and of that original, 50% of it is good and 50% of it is bad. Sometimes you get Bruno Mars and no Gantu, and sometimes you get heights like this. It is a real interesting case that leaves me so frustrated because while it's great family entertainment, there is no extra layer of depth or messaging. The whole Hawaii tourist thing, completely gone. And Stitch never brings back his alien-y limbs because he has to be the polished down, marketable plushie that Disney has to run with and is too afraid to do anything dynamic. A company that's completely changed its face in the 23 years since the original. I hear that critics take this movie quite positively. It's because it is a live-action remake that is frustratingly pretty good. But when you start digging, there's so many complaints. 6 out of 10. The CGI looks good, I guess. That's at least all the thoughts I have to say about Disney's live-action Lilo and Stitch remake. I've seen it once. I'll see it again for our terrible coverage. I really want to dig into the delivery differences between the two main movies. But for now, my name's been Daz. Thank you very much for reaching the end of this video. Do tell me your thoughts on the Lilo and Stitch movie when you get around to seeing it. I'd love to hear all of your thoughts and more. And I shall see you all in a little bit. Bye-bye.